Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar From CDN to Edge Content Delivery, Quantifying the Big Opportunity, conducted in conjunction with Varnish Software. Before starting the presentations, I want to introduce the speakers to you. We just go on. My name's Chris Barraclough. I'm the CEO at STL Partners. I'll be moderating today, and I've got my colleagues from STL, Tilly and Ella, who will present, as well as Ulrika and Taze from Varnish Software. We'll kick off the presentation with STL, and then we'll move on to Varnish, and then follow with a Q&A discussion. If we just go on to a little bit of housekeeping, just to give you a little bit of guidance, if you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, you're in listen-only mode, so you cannot speak, and there is a panel on your right-hand side with an arrow where you can expand or hide, which is illustrated by number 1 there. And if you want some help, please do comment in the panel box in the questions area, or put your hand up, which you can do so by pressing the little button where number 2 is shown. We'll be taking questions through the discussion. So if you have a question when somebody is presenting, please do put that in the questions box, and I'll put that to the panelists. Just to remind you, this is being recorded, and it'll be possible for you and or your colleagues to reference this afterwards. We'll send out links to the recording, and if you want to tweet us, you can do so at the handle there. We look forward to that. So hopefully that's clear. Any problems? I am told that a headset is best, a USB headset, so that's the best way of listening, but hopefully you don't have any problems. If you do, let us know and we'll see if we can fix that for you. So without further ado, let me hand over to Tilly and to Ella, and let's kick off.
Thanks, Chris. So hopefully many of the attendees to this webinar will be aware that at STL Partners, we have a range of experience in the edge computing space, including working with telecoms operators, technology clients on developing commercial strategies for edge computing. And we will be leveraging throughout the webinar today some research that we have done in collaboration with Varnish, but also some research produced by STL, including our edge market forecast models, which we produce every year for the industry. And today we'll be focusing in particularly on the intersection between edge computing and content delivery, and discussing a little bit about where there are opportunities for edge to help to shape the way that content delivery is done in the future, and trying to quantify that a little bit and put some numbers on what we see as the size of the opportunity today. So the first thing that I'll be running you guys through is just talking a little bit about why we're talking about content delivery in the context of edge computing and what synergies we see between the two. So first of all, I'm showing you guys a key chart generated from our edge computing market forecast, where we predict that the total addressable revenues coming from edge computing across the next 10 years could grow globally to around 450 billion by 2030. The main thing that I want to point your guys' attention to in this chart is the dominance of the red block here in terms of generating revenues stemming from edge computing. And that red block is the block associated with media and entertainment. Now, we do also see significant edge computing traction in industry verticals like transport, manufacturing and retail. Those are some of the other big ones, but it is clear that media and entertainment is driving the lion's share of opportunity in edge computing, according to our market forecast over the 10 years. And that actually translates to, in 2026, 86 billion being associated with media and entertainment, and that's about 48% of the edge revenues. So what we're essentially saying is about half of the revenues coming from edge computing in 2026, we expect will be generated by use cases associated with the media and entertainment market. And within that, we see content delivery as one of the key anchor use cases. Another way of looking at this is in this chart that I'm going to talk you through now, What I'm showing here is I'm showing you on the y-axis the level of need for edge. So we're going to be showing you some different use cases and indicating to you how significantly we think edge is required to deliver that use case successfully today. On the x-axis, we're going to be plotting those same use cases against time to maturity. So we're going to be saying, when do we expect these use cases to really be driving demand for edge infrastructure? Is it in the relative short term, the next 0 to 2 years, or is this a use case which is really going to mature later on in the next 3 to 6 years plus? What you can see when I reveal the use cases is that content delivery, as well as a couple of other use cases, including cloud gaming and video analytics, are really significant opportunities. And that's because they are among the top 3 most mature use cases. So they're use cases we really expect to mature in the next 0 to 2 years. But they're also use cases that have a really high requirement and need for edge. And Ella's going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. The actual bubble size here represents the relative value of each use case in 2026. So you can see that content delivery, along with cloud gaming and video analytics, is also a relatively large use case. And that stems from the level of need for edge and the maturity that's driving that. So in 2026, we argue that we think edge content delivery as a use case is going to be about 13% of the overall edge market. So that's a little bit why we were keen to do this webinar today, why we're keen to do this research and put out this work with Varnish, because we see content delivery as a use case which is both mature and overall will be a big opportunity and has a high level of need for edge. And I'm going to pass over to my colleague Ella, who's going to run you through some of that in a little bit more detail.
Yes, so thanks, Tilly. Now I will talk through some of the demands we are seeing from customers and how edge can have a play in supporting them. I will then briefly touch upon how the infrastructure will change on the transition to edge content delivery. We will then talk a bit about some of the use cases with some examples just to see how edge content delivery will play a role there. So the landscape of content delivery has been changing rapidly within the past couple of years. So here in this slide, we have categorized the customer demands that are currently shaping the content delivery market. So the first one is the increasing demand in the amount of video. The researches we conducted have shown that around 70% of web traffic comes from video, and we expect this figure to grow even further in the future. So the emerging OTT video platforms are one of the few factors that are supporting this demand. And in addition to this, there also has been an increasing demand for live streaming, and customers are also looking for more interactive features within gaming, which again is a big factor for the increase in the amount of video content. We also see video playing an important part in supporting use cases, like Tilly said, so especially with flow analysis, quality assurance, and security. And another factor for driving this demand is the use of mixed reality by enterprises. So the scenarios where mixed reality is particularly important for enterprises can be for training and simulation, marketing by using immersive ads in virtual reality, or by enabling immersive shopping experiences. This, of course, follows with a demand for increased video quality. So with such a demand, we have seen the video resolutions moving to 4K and 8K, again, significantly increasing the video burden within the networks. It is also useful to mention within this context that such high quality videos are not only being consumed, but also are being generated by users, meaning that there is both an uplink and downlink pressure within networks. Immersive experiences like 360 video streams, augmented or virtual reality also call for high quality video. So Tilly will briefly touch upon this point later, but just to summarize, we have also been seeing a high demand for personalized features, both from the enterprises but also from the customers. We've seen many players putting personalized advertisements on top of their agenda, well, particularly large OTT content streaming providers, large retailers, and social media application providers. Such personalized experiences or advertisements have also proven to benefit both the customer and the enterprise, as it enhances customer experience, and as a result, of course, enables incremental revenue gains for enterprises. So within this sphere, the increasing use of machine learning also has been crucial, as machine learning can help improve the outcomes by assisting the generation of personalized ads. This also ties in with the increasing demand for more interactive features. As mentioned, we see gaming becoming one of the key strands for video content, and customers are increasingly demanding advanced features such as multiplayer and cloud gaming, multi-angle and point of view streams, and remote collaboration. These demands, without a doubt, will need new ways of content delivery, mostly because these interactive features will need hardware that can handle more compute-intensive workloads. So here in the slide, we have listed some of the benefits of edge computing in terms of how it might enable players to address these changing demands that I have just touched upon. So one of the best known benefits of edge computing is its ability to handle higher bandwidth. So by using edge computing, because the traffic within the networks are processed closer to the end user, the overall amount of network traffic is reduced, meaning that a more efficient use of bandwidth can be achieved. This will also mean that features that require more compute can be better served when compared to a traditional CDN model. Edge computing will also enable data processing at very low latencies, again, enabling better user experience when delivering compute high features that I've mentioned previously. Edge computing is also highly scalable. So when experiencing high demands of peak traffic, such as the live broadcasting of a sports event, the compute and storage capabilities can be spun up on demand, making more efficient delivery of the content. This can also, of course, apply to the opposite scenario when there isn't much traffic on the network, so it goes both ways. And another additional benefit of the edge is its flexibility in terms of consumption and commercial models. A more decoupled stack will mean CDN providers will have better flexibility to scale, which I will also touch upon in the next slide. So it is without a doubt that edge computing will be key in serving the emerging customer demands, but this will also mean that the current infrastructure for content delivery will see some changes. So here in this slide, we compare how infrastructure of a traditional CDN will evolve into an edge content delivery infrastructure to serve such needs. So currently, in what we call a traditional CDN, the physical location of the server is at internet exchanges or within the ISP network, as is shown in the diagram. And in an edge content delivery model, however, the servers will be distributed deeper into both the ISP and the MNO networks to support the heavier workloads. When we look at the stack, what the stack might look like, we can see that the vast majority of a traditional CDN server will consist mainly of storage servers, which will be focused on caching content. The stack of the traditional CDN will therefore not have many servers dedicated to delivering more dynamic capabilities, which may require compute. A traditional CDN stack will also often be proprietary to the CDN provider and therefore will be owned and managed by that CDN provider. When we look at the stack of an edge content delivery server, we can see that the stack will be better suited to serve dynamic capabilities such as interactive elements and personalized features. However, this will also mean that this new infrastructure will need to be more performant in order to handle heavier workloads, especially during peak traffic hours. Edge content delivery will also see the hardware and software being decoupled to enable COTS hardware to be used. And what I mean by decoupling in this context is seeing the software and hardware executing independently while still interfacing with each other. When we look at the commercial models, in a traditional CDN, the CDN provider will likely have a long-term co-location agreement with the facility's owners, and therefore will have limited flexibility in terms of scaling dynamically. An edge content delivery model can, however, be consumed as an infrastructure as a service type of model, meaning that it will have a more flexible and cloud-like commercial model, which can be much more cost-effective when we compare it to the commercial models we see for traditional CDN stacks. This is because in traditional CDN commercial models, the contracts are mostly based on peak time traffic, whereas in edge content delivery models, there is a chance to scale more dynamically based on the amount of network traffic. So of course, most people will want to understand the business case for these sort of edge content delivery experiences before they invest. This business case will likely be two-sided for most businesses. So firstly, edge content delivery will save them money through reducing backhaul and the costs of using the cloud by processing and filtering the data closer to the end user. Most edge content delivery solutions will also be able to leverage common infrastructure and platforms, meaning that the utilization and life cycle of hardware can be extended. Most will also expect a revenue uptick from the implementation of these solutions, so either through providing better customer experience of existing solutions, for instance, by helping to increase customer time on platforms by personalized features, as I've mentioned, or by enabling new business models for use cases. So this is due to more on-demand and dynamic provisioning being possible, or through unlocking new use cases entirely that do not really exist today. And lastly, as a key part of the business case, for many enterprises today is the impact of edge content delivery on energy consumption and carbon footprint. Especially with the current energy crisis, processing data in a more energy efficient way is both economically and morally critical. And this is also where we see edge computing making a real impact as well.
So lastly, just to bring this to life, I wanted to walk through a couple of examples of the way that we see edge content delivery working, and how we see it as being different from models that we're seeing today. So 2 quick examples on this. The first one is focused on the broadcast of live events. So what happens today in a traditional delivery model is that a large crew is sent to the site of the event, with each broadcaster bringing their individual team with them. And they are also bringing with them extensive and fairly heavy equipment in outdoor broadcast vans. There are often multiple vans handling the connectivity, the production, and the distribution respectively, so 1 van for each. And multiple camera feeds are processed in the production van before sending a single transmission back to the centralized distribution center, where a smaller team will edit the footage and distribute this to customers. And this model incurs quite large transport and equipment costs. In the future, a combination of edge processing and potentially specialized network slicers will allow cameras to upload their individual streams directly to an edge cloud. This drastically reduces the amount of equipment required at the site, cloudifying the processing and the production suite, so those elements are no longer needed on site. It also gives more flexibility around things like the video angles and the streams that end users might be able to choose. Video optimization at the edge can also reduce the lag between the video capture and the audience viewing, and that can increase audience satisfaction and potentially enable new use cases, such as in-game micro betting in a sports context. The second quick use case, just to walk you guys through, is more around web optimization and personalization. So as Ella said, a large proportion of internet traffic today is video, but there are still really demanding non-video workloads that are running and flowing through the networks as well. For this example, to illustrate, we can see that today I've got a traditional website and it can struggle to handle peaks in demand. And when it is struggling to handle peaks in demand, that can cause videos to buffer or large file downloads to lag or fail. And that can lead to bad outcomes for the website owner, including people churning or clicking off the website. In the next generation websites, which is leveraging edge application delivery networks, you can see that instead of the buffering video on the left-hand side, we've got a video that's playing nicely, and that has been enabled through real-time video content optimization. And you can also see that my website now has real-time personalization, so it is showing me my particular interest in reading and football. And this can enable new and innovative forms of rich media advertising. It can also enable additional features like more secure and faster payment processing, which is really important for good outcomes. And these sorts of abilities around web optimization we see only becoming more critical as we move to a Web 3.0 world. And as we see the metaverse turning these 2D websites, as we're showing them here, into 3D virtual worlds that are going to have even more demands on the network in order to run and smoothly. So hopefully that's given you guys a bit of a sense of what we see the opportunity being and how we see edge content delivery as being fundamentally different from the traditional CDN models that we see today. And I will now pass over to Ulrika and Thijs from Varnish, who will talk a little bit about the Varnish perspective on all of this and what you guys are seeing out in the market as practitioners in this space.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much, Ella and Tilly. And I think your messages resonate very well with our perspectives that we're happy to share today from a market development perspective. And let's see here if I can move the slides. Am I allowed to do that now? There we go. There we go. Thank you. So this is what we're going to talk about, from CDN to edge content delivery. And we're going to do it both from a commercial perspective, but also from a technical perspective. And we'll be very happy to also share some practical examples of how this works in reality. And I think it's very fair to say that over the past 10-15 years, markets have evolved to handle all this traffic over the HTTP, and it's been based on caching technology. And initially, it was very much linked to protecting the origin, accelerating websites, and handling concurrent requests. And that's what led up to this web acceleration and API protection market, the WAP market. And this is, of course, still very, very important for most enterprises. But also in parallel, the well-known commercial CDN market has evolved, driven by the need for massive storage for caching content, having control and being able to distribute the content in the best way. And this led to the aggregated full service CDN models we see today, all underpinned by performing caching technology. And I think this is also where Varnish software comes in to play. And I'll hand over to you, Thijs, to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Ulrika. Hi, everyone. Yes, we come from this world of caching and come from this world of HTTP, but it dates back a lot earlier, because HTTP as a protocol that we've used for so long actually has caching mechanisms built into its protocol. So initially it was just developed to cache within the browser. But as we've evolved and as the internet evolved with the influx of extra bandwidth and all the capabilities that came with that, all of a sudden you need to offload your origin servers that are under tremendous pressure. So caching technology has always been there, and we as a company have always been there as well. So while web acceleration and the typical API protection market was heavily relying on HTTP caching, all of a sudden we evolved even further to an extent that all of a sudden we have a more of a global internet where people all over the world can reach millions of other people, and also the domains of application evolving massively. As we've seen in STL's presentation, we go way beyond what the internet was originally designed for, going from typical website acceleration to transmitting videos, doing cloud gaming maybe in the future in a successful way, just transmitting a massive amount of data. And you'll see that throughout what we're about to say. It's all about the user experience. And in order to attain that user experience, you need to make sure that the content is closer to the user. So some key metrics like latency and throughput all of a sudden start to matter. And we have been in that market, and we have always been in that market. Like most people know us, Varnish Software, from our roots in the web acceleration business. We've been in there since 2006, specifically for the media industry originally, but about 10 million active websites use our technology. 21% of the top 10,000 websites use that. And as a company and as stewards of that open source project, we also evolved to a more enterprise product that we use to be heavily involved in the content delivery market. And I'm happy to say that a lot of companies use this to either build private CDNs or even public ones. Some of the bigger CDNs, there are a couple who actually use Varnish technology under the hood. So we're very happy with that.
Yeah, and this is where we are today. As Tilly showed with the edge computing market outlook here, but the ever-increasing traffic is driving these markets, and it's linked to new use cases and technology enablers that you talked about that put strain on the existing models for content delivery. And when we work with our customers, it's pretty much today linked to the web content optimization still, a lot about the video on demand streaming, the live streaming that you gave an example of also, Tilly, and software updates. And as you've said, Ella, it's in the future it's going to be about immersive experiences, personalization. So this is putting demands on content delivery, as are the technology enablers that we see, more performing off-the-shelf hardware, the video quality, 4K, 8K, the connectivity with 5G and satellites, and intelligent networks. So this is, all coming together to what we see as new and tough requirements on content delivery. And at the center of that, of course, is the user experience. And I'll hand over to you, Taste, to say a few words about these requirements.
Yes, because it is obviously about the user experience, and those new technologies who are coming can only succeed if the user experience is second to none. But this is the point where I have to congratulate and commend the CDNs, because they have done a sterling job in keeping the internet afloat for the last 15 years. If I can put it in disrespectful terms, they have been the perfect plumbers of the internet for a long time. And they have actually facilitated a lot of the internet as is. Without CDNs, we wouldn't have low latency and high concurrency and high throughput. However, there's limitations to the model. So we're not trying to disrespect CDNs, but we do try to point out for certain companies who really want to fully own the UX in every part possible, they're a bit hindered in the way they're going to approach this. And this is going to only get accelerated with, and you can see it there with the technology enablers with 5G. Not necessarily 5G as mobile technology, but as a new bar that has been set, the new expectations in terms of latency, in terms of throughput, and also in terms of that scalability that we measure under concurrency. So there's a lot still to happen, and we see that certain companies can no longer 100% rely on the traditional model. Now, I'm not saying that we should throw out CDNs, it will be more of a hybrid way, but in order to see these more immersive experiences, as Ella and Tilly mentioned, we need to drive this to the next level. And for a lot of people, it's looking at how can you gain better control, because it's a question of control. How do you gain more control, get more transparency in what's happening? How can we tailor the experience to our exact needs? How do we integrate it with existing systems? And also, at what cost is this happening? Because we see that there's a lot of companies who spend a lot of money on content delivery, who have the network and potentially have the infrastructure. So it's a lot about that, but it's also about energy these days, right? Isn't it, Ulrika?
Yeah, and maybe that's a good opportunity to brag a little bit here about the performance itself. Taste?
Yeah. Well, it is. These are the numbers, and these are official numbers. While it may seem like a brag, we just want to put it in the right perspective. So as a CDS, so we're not a CDN, we call ourselves CDS, Content Delivery Software. We actually have been benchmarked by Intel on their latest generation of hardware and chips, and we ended up being able to perform throughput rates of 1.3 terabits per second on a single node. And if you look at that from an electricity point of view and an energy point of view, which is a big deal in this day and age, we're talking about 1.17 gigabits per second per watt. So that's quite tremendous. And at the time being, we're the world's fastest edge content delivery software, as benchmarked by Intel. Of course, it's a race. People will catch up, will continue to innovate. So if you look at it from a sustainability point of view, and that means many things, right? Sustainability, even the sustainability of your business from a commercial point of view, the operational aspects of it, but also the environmental aspect, doing more with less is starting to grow. We talk about energy and the fact that we're still in an energy crisis. I'm hoping that we're at the tail end of this, but who's to say? Also, chip shortage, it's still a real thing. So if you can do more with less, you're really achieving your sustainability goals, even the environmental ones. So we're happy with that, and we're hoping that this could help companies reach that next level. Now, of course, we fully appreciate that not everyone needs 1.3 terabits per second, but it just goes to show that we're looking at optimizing all of this.
And that's leading into what's ahead, having now talked a bit about the markets, the way they develop over the last decade, and the drivers and requirements we see on content delivery in conjunction with this edge compute development. And that leads us into what we call the great opportunity. I think you, Estelle, you guys have called this the great opportunity. And it's about capturing value from this software-defined content delivery on the edge. And what do we mean with software-defined content delivery? It's actually not that complicated. It's about decoupling the hardware, the infrastructure from the software. And this is where this whole edge development and edge compute comes into play. And that hardware can, of course, still be the origin servers, but it's also very flexible in terms of the location of the hardware and the infrastructure, which is what we refer to as the edge. And when we add to this the software decoupled That's what we call the content delivery software market, and that is very applicable for web and application performance, for content delivery itself, and going forward for edge enablement in a broader sense. And we see this as a real value driver. We mentioned this already in terms of the user experience and the lower costs, more revenue, flexibility and scaling. And as Tace was saying, it's not about ripping out and replacing the old models, it's about complementing. And we see this in our work, that it's very much a hybrid models now when we look ahead. Do you want to comment on that, Tace?
Yes, I do want to comment on one of those punchlines you put on there, software-defined content delivery. I do strongly believe that the future is software-defined, and we've seen that throughout with other parts of the innovation chain. Like if you look at how infrastructure is dealt with nowadays, we started out with working with bare metal servers. That evolved thanks to virtualization to the cloud. So that was a software-defined move. But it even went further. Nowadays, people are talking about things like Kubernetes and containerization, which is a further abstraction and a disaggregation from the clouds to software being entirely separate and the infrastructure as well. And I think that is, for us, the way to go. But indeed, it's not that we're trying to replace CDNs. We're trying to complement them where it matters for certain clients. And where that matters is looking at the edge and the location aspect. The edge is all about the flexibility that you want to give the clients, so your end users, what they need. And for CDNs, that obviously means having data centers and presence in the key markets, which makes total sense. And that's what they're designed for. But we see a lot of people we work with, we talk to, who have more regional concerns, like maybe focus more on origin offloading, or for certain broadcasters who are specifically tied to a country, who instead of having global coverage, really want presence, like if we apply to the UK, maybe in Manchester and in London, and for every country that differs. So that edge location flexibility matters. If you look at it from a 5G perspective, it's also the ability to move that a lot closer to the end user, not necessarily from a country point of view or maybe a state point of view, but actually maybe more regional in the mobile antennas and the base stations there. So that matters. The flexibility of the edge matters, and also the definition of what the edge will actually do will start to matter. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but I do want to mention there that it's also about, on the one hand, putting the content as close as possible, as in typical content delivery, but instead of just focusing on pushing the content, rather you offer a dynamic experience and actually use the compute power to generate more personalized experience, to do more personalized ads in video, to maybe even from a retail point of view, the user information, the shopping cart information, all of that can be computed on the edge and will ensure that otherwise uncacheable data becomes somewhat cacheable or computable. So it all, in the end, it all comes back to user experience.
Mm. And that leads to the question, to what extent is this software-defined content delivery model applicable across industries and even platforms? And here we think the answer is quite easy as well. It's highly applicable, and we've been in this business for some time now and have great logos across the globe. We can't actually mention all of them, unfortunately, but we'll mention a few just to be very concrete here. And the obvious industries, of course, are the telecom and streaming verticals, where there's massive amount of content in the networks being handled. And Hulu is one example of the big logos. We work with quite a few of the other ones too. And I think Orange is a good telco example, where by using our Varnish enterprise software, they can really do more with less, as we talked about. And they've improved the throughput per server with 100% with Varnish enterprise software. So I think that's a very concrete example. Then we have another example, which in an industry which might be a little bit less expected. It's the Tesla example, where they use our enterprise software to power their e-commerce activities, and they're now extending to move their core applications to the edge, from developer tools to factory applications and even firmware delivery to the cars they move off the production line. So I think this is a good example of what we can see more of ahead as well. We have the usual suspects in media, retail, and e-commerce, of course, with lots of web acceleration and content delivery needs, and maybe a few less anticipated verticals that we work with, like finance and travel. But also here, it's a lot about the user experience and also about the handling very critical and large amounts of content. So yeah, a few examples of companies applying this in reality, just the software on any hardware, and that leads over to the platform part of it, Theis.
Yes, indeed. And I do, before talking about the platform, do want to emphasize that we hear a lot of stories of people who benefit from that. And telcos are a pretty obvious one. I talked to a North American telecom a couple of weeks ago, where they told us that they offer services to their clientele and they use CDNs for that. But the problem is that a lot of it goes through their network in and out. So for them, it was like, okay, we have the infrastructure and we have the network. Can't we just have a piece of software? So for them, it mattered to distribute a lot of that content and also to put it closer than what a traditional CDN could do, of course. Now, another story that I found particularly interesting was a couple of months ago, I talked to one of the bigger gaming platforms, and they had record-breaking years in terms of top-line revenue during COVID. Everyone was stuck at home and they were consuming a lot of gaming and digital content. And while that was spectacular, record-breaking for them, like at the bottom line level, it didn't look too good. So they started asking the question, and obviously spent a lot of money on content delivery. It's important for me to mention that this is not a stab at CDNs. This is their business model. They bill for bandwidth, but for companies like that who have in specific markets already some data centers, it made a lot of sense, and they can calculate it that through the 100+ data centers they had globally for other services, if they would move a part of that to their data center, it could save them a couple of $1 million a year without really cutting out the CDN entirely, but complementing them with local POPs. So there's so much happening. And the thing is, you can host this on any kind of hardware that you want, and that's where we get to the platform. Traditionally, if you're doing really high performance stuff where the throughput really matters, if you want to reach that 1.3 terabits per second, of course, you're going to use bare metal. But it's very hybrid. So whereas you can use your traditional CDN in conjunction with some bare metal, you can run some VMs. You can, even for areas where the traffic is unpredictable or where you're not even sure what type of traffic you'll have, you can use cloud or more container-based cloud native solutions. So it's all very flexible, and there's not a single truth. It's not us saying, you should do this, you should do that. We see some opportunities that go hand in hand with more traditional use cases, and it's a matter of mixing and matching, in my opinion.
And that leads us to our final question here. If this is a long and cumbersome journey to get on, this disaggregation, decoupling can sound a bit complicated, but in the world of content distribution, content delivery, it's not actually. And I think, at least compared to some other industries. So Theis, you have some good examples here of how we can work in practice to build a private CDN.
I do. Now, these are one-off screenshots, but I'll contextualize them. Now, the people of STL probably know these because we worked together with them and organized a world tour. So in October and November of last year, I actually traveled the world to talk about this. Now, I'm a bit boxed in terms of the format, so I only have a couple of minutes left. So the only thing I can do is show you screenshots and hint towards the solution. So as a company, for many, many years, we developed the engine of many web acceleration and content delivery solutions. I like to use the analogy of the automotive industry. We were an engine supplier. We told people, go build your own sports car. We have the best engine. And they did. But we implemented this with so many parties, be it from a web acceleration and content delivery point of view, that we saw some parallels. And we decided to build our own proverbial car. And we did that with 3 specific products. So on the one hand, we still have our engine called Varnish Enterprise, which has all the power that it needs to do the caching. What you're seeing here is the control plane, which we call the Varnish controller, that allows you to host this wherever you want and to control the servers and manage deployments. So this could be a mixture of on-prem, virtualization, elsewhere, could be cloud native. So this is where it all ends up, and these are the working horses. But can you take me to the next slide, please, Ulrika? This is code, and I'm not sure how many people are technical. I'm just gonna summarize what's happening here. We have our own programming language called the Varnish configuration language, which plays very well into this edge topic and those personalization topics. We allow you to develop, to integrate with your own solutions, and to actually customize the full caching behavior within that control plane. And that gets deployed to all the servers you have wherever you put them. But there's more, of course. Can you take me to the next one, please, Ulrika? Then, of course, once it's running and all that traffic is flowing through, you want to see how it is operating. So we have this really simple demo setup where the screenshot comes from, where we have a point of presence in California, one in Dublin, Ireland, and one in Singapore. And then you can see I've thrown a bit of dummy traffic on it, about 5.6 gigabits per second, and you can individually inspect that. That's just an example of a GUI feature, but under the hood, we've provided many metric points that allow people to actually see what's going on in their solution. Fits in well with transparency and increased need for control. And then there's one final slide, of course. The glue that ties it all together is our third product, which is the Varnish Traffic Router. And that is a very dedicated routing system that allows you to choose where traffic is going to end up in that hybrid setup. We can do this based on utilization parameters, on geolocation, closest proximity, exception rules like you can see here. If you're in Malaysia, traffic is going to go to a specific POP. You can use network parameters, or you can define it yourself in plugins. So this is really, as mentioned, the glue that ties it all together, and that turns these individual components into an actual content delivery solution. Now, I would love to show you a demo, but we have no time for that. But
No.
That is what I can show you. And I'm actually doing our product a disservice by reducing it to screenshots, but you get the idea, right, ladies and gentlemen?
It's a teaser. It's a teaser, and
It is.
very concrete as well. So I think that's a good complement to the more high-level market stuff. But let us sum up. So first of all, we totally agree with STL. Content delivery is happening on the edge, and it's like by nature a use case for edge compute. Secondly, there is a great opportunity to create value with this agnostic performant content delivery software, and we really believe this market is going to grow a lot going forward. And the value comes, as we talked about, partly from just using your existing or new hardware in a much more efficient way. And lastly, as Theis has demonstrated here, it's actually easy to capture this opportunity and implement it across use cases that we talked about, across these different industries, across platforms and locations. For us, the edge is basically where you need it, and this decoupling and the software-defined content delivery is the key to it. And I think, again, from our perspective, this is just the beginning, right?
Yes, indeed. Now, while we're really happy with the direction we're heading in, there's a lot of innovation still happening, both on our end, but in the general industry. Like, I don't want to pretend like we're the only CDS company in the world. There's others as well who do a good job, and we see certain standards appearing, but like it goes with standards, some will make it, others won't. I'll give you one concrete example. What we're looking at, we like where the WASM is going, the WebAssembly is going. We see that this could be a tremendous opportunity to standardize workloads being run on the edge. And but for now, we're really happy with VCL, with Varnish Configuration Language, and that ecosystem of modules. But again, we're in the labs, we're researching it, and others are as well. So the future looks bright.
Yeah, and we have a vision, and that is life without latency, coming back to the user, but also the developer experience. And that's why we're here for Varnish Software. And want to thank you, STL, for having us here. And if anyone on this webinar wants more information, you can contact us here at sales@varnishsoftware.com, or come visit us at one of these great trade shows ahead. You'll be there, Theis, for sure.
Yes, I'll be at all of them. So if you want to go beyond this 15-minute explanation and you want to actually see it, and you're in Las Vegas in April on the NAB show, or in Angacom in Cologne, Germany in May, or in Singapore on Broadcast Asia in June, or at IBC in September, come to our booth, come chat with us, have a drink with me. I'll talk you through it, and I'll show you a demo, and maybe that'll get you excited. But anyway, thanks for everyone for being here, and thanks to STL for the opportunity.
And over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Theis, Ulrika. I guess what you were talking about, and I think what Tilly and Ella were talking about, is happening in telecoms. So if we go back 5 or 10 years, we had telecoms network being run on integrated hardware and software solutions provided by network equipment providers. And the process we're going through in telecoms is decoupling the hardware and the software. And we're now getting a whole host of new players offering network function capability on a range of standardized hardware. And that is a process. And it's hugely complicated in telecoms. We're living through that process. I think what you're saying is that same thing is happening in content delivery. It's a little bit simpler than running a telecoms and moving the complexities of interconnected telecoms networks and so on in terms of doing that. But what we're doing is getting the ability to be able to cache content in the right place for the particular use case we're talking about. So this is sort of analogous to what most of the people on this, the audience here in the telecoms industry, are living through at the moment. I guess the question this then, that I would ask is then, what do you see as the role of the telco in, content delivery as it evolves? Where and how is this relevant to them? They've obviously had relationships with the traditional CDN providers, the Akamais of this world. How is this changing, and what's the role of the telco? Maybe kick off with Tilly, and then maybe open that up to the guys at Varnish.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think we're seeing some of the expectations of telecoms operators change in terms of how much visibility and control they want of the CDN or the content delivery and caching elements that are kept within their networks. And I think that gets magnified when we think about pushing some of that infrastructure even deeper into their network. So I know we had some questions from some folks who are listening in about just how deep within the networks we're talking here. How far do we see this going? And I think realistically what we're seeing today is that operators are do have CDN and content delivery software cached maybe in their core fixed network data centers, and we're talking about this pushing out more into the mobile network, more into, say, transport locations. And the reason I raise this is because I think this fundamentally changes what operators want and see as their role. And that's because the economic model of having individual CDN operators coming and putting in an appliance black box into their network becomes less attractive the deeper you go, and it becomes less attractive for the telco because they are now working in more space and power constrained locations. It also actually becomes, I think, less attractive for the CDN company as well, because they are talking about having to replicate a large amount of infrastructure in very many locations, and the business case for that gets harder and harder. And so I think we see that there could be an interesting role for a telecoms operator to take a little bit more ownership over that, and take a little bit more ownership over the space and the delivery, and perhaps work with some different types of players to maybe offer a multi-tenant content delivery solution, to come up with new collaboration models with those producing content, and perhaps be able to see this as something which is more of a revenue generating opportunity than has historically been the case for telcos, where content delivery and caching and CDN has been focused more on how do I reduce my backhaul costs, and how do I optimize efficiency of my networks. So for me, those are some of the changes in what I expect that the telco role could be. But of course, Varnish have got their own perspective on this. So maybe Ulrika or Taze, one of you would want to add or have your own comments on that question.
Yeah, no, I can just echo that. I think there are like two drivers for the telcos. It's of course this more for less. You have the infrastructure, and how can you take advantage of that in the different layers in your network? I think that's a very strong driver today in our engagements. But absolutely, and we talked about this earlier, Taze, about the involuntary CDN kind of role of telcos, so, right?
Yeah, indeed. So all of a sudden, telcos who already have the network and the infrastructure, as I mentioned a couple of times, if they have the software, well, it depends on what they want to do. Are they forced to improve the user experience on their network for certain domains of application? Well, then they need the software to do that edge capability. Is it a cost-cutting exercise? Of course, that works as well. But all of a sudden, if they have that in there, they can tap into that, because our software, for example, is multi-tenant. So you can talk to certain clients and say, look, you can use part of our CDN here. We can give you a separate tenant. You can tweak the behavior of the cache to your exact needs. You can write your own code in there. So I would call it more of a sort of a happy accident, but maybe as time progresses and this matures, this will become an actual use case that a lot of telcos want to be part of.
So from a telco perspective, this enables them to provide a better customer experience, presumably at a lower cost. You're not shipping content from so far back in the network out, so you get some, and there is also an opportunity for, if the revenue is being generated from the content provider for distributing their content, there's a rev share opportunity with the telco on that. So there is a benefit to their customer base and a business opportunity for them. It could be on both the cost and the revenue side, I guess. We've got a few specific questions. There was a question about security and how that works and what the benefits and disadvantages of a sort of disaggregated content delivery software solution is compared with a cloud solution. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I can comment on that. If you look at it more from a conceptual point of view, if you buy a CDN service, you have a black box and it's managed by others. So it comes with all the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is you have people out there taking care of you, but you don't really see to what extent that goes. So if you have security concerns and you have people internally who want to be involved in that, having more transparency and more or less insourcing this back by using CDS rather than CDN will allow you to have a lot better insights. Like I talked about the measurement points and the fact that you can customize all this, not just the caching behavior, but also what you log, what you measure, all that kind of stuff. So it's a matter of, do you want to be involved in that or do you trust others? Like, is this your core business or do you have concerns depending on that? So it comes with all the advantages and disadvantages. So if you want to control it, you can do it.
Yeah, and the security features are in there in the software, right? So it's part of it. Mm.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of really long multi-question. One question is about the video functionality of the product. So is it for video streaming or is it just caching, or can you run computation intensive tasks on the edge-based software? So it'd be good to get your thoughts on that. My understanding is it's a caching solution predominantly. Is that right?
It is predominantly a caching solution, but thanks to that varnish configuration language, you can actually do modifications on the edge. Now, speaking of compute intensive, the way we see it is we operate more or less in terms of personalization on the manifest level of online video streaming, ad insertion, customizing the type of feeds you want to tap into, rather than doing super heavy computing stuff by maybe decrypting or working with the actual video files. So while it is primarily caching, we see a lot of value in manipulating. If we talk about the protocols about HLS manifests or impact dash manifests, we see a lot of value in there. And some of the demos I'm preparing for the trade shows are more in that arena of personalizing video streams at the manifest level.
And our argument and what we put forward in our presentation is that we do see that some of the value that comes with distributing to the edge needs to come hand in hand with the ability to do smarter things there as well. So it is not all about caching and storage. That's been something that has happened for some time. It's about adding some smarter elements to that require some compute, and it may not be, hugely compute intensive AI models that might be more appropriate still to run elsewhere, run in the cloud, but there is an element of that we see as important to unlocking the types of use cases that we talked about today.
Just to remind, we have only got a few minutes left. We've had a lot of questions. What we will do is we will respond to these questions and send out specific answers. Some of them are very specific about GDPR compliance and so on for Varnish software. We will send you those, so that will come through. But there's been a really interesting question, and I think it is worth us discussing a moment, which is, as a telco, the major content owners who are responsible for a large proportion of traffic, they are looking for 1 to 5 large CDN providers for their global content distribution. And as a telco, how do you participate in content distribution if you cannot provide that global coverage? And I think this is something we did a little bit of modeling on. And what we found was, yeah, there are the Metas and so on of this world and Netflix that have certain solutions available. We're often not talking specifically about that here. We're talking about a long tail of a more fragmented market that is growing quite quickly for enterprises. Can we talk a little bit about where we see the opportunity for telcos? Because it probably isn't necessarily directly in supporting Netflix that has their solution. It's really in a different market. Maybe talk a little bit about that, Tilly, and then Thijs and Ulrika.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are some telcos that will operate in markets where there's very regional content delivery players that are specific. So, for instance, the Indian market might be one where telecoms operators probably have a role working with some of the biggest content producers in that market. But there are going to be other markets where Chris is right. Those major players, the Netflixes, etc., have their solution, have their way of delivering content, and they're not necessarily going to look to a telco who is generally regionally focused in a few markets to help with their global scale content delivery. But what we're absolutely seeing is that there are a large number of other enterprises that are looking for support in content delivery. There's a large number of companies that have websites where most of the traffic comes from one sort of region. There's also a large number of content delivery use cases which are actually internal to an enterprise, whether that be for their training requirements, whether that be for their intranets, or for other video software platforms that they're using internally with their employees. So we see that there are a number of use cases that move beyond just thinking about Netflix, because that's the one that comes to mind for everyone when we talk about content. And some of those more regional centric and more enterprise centric use cases are potentially more interesting for telcos to take a stronger role. And yeah, others, if they've got thoughts, feel free to share as well on that one.
I totally agree, Tilly. Yeah.
But I see that more on a personal note than as a representative of our company. We see that some countries, including mine, I live in Belgium, by the way, that certain broadcasters are forming alliances to build an alternative to Netflix for more regional content. For people who are on the road, who are done with set-top boxes, who are done with watching linear TV. And for those, it really matters. Also, don't forget that we're looking at mostly from the core network of a telco, but with everything going mobile and 5G, these telcos also own the base stations of all that 4 and 5G, and we've already mentioned it. A lot of it is moving closer, more regional. If we're looking at changing the types of experiences that we have, like you talked about, Tilly, you talked about more immersive experiences. Well, then you can leverage your position there as a more regional player, because you own that piece that is very valuable for the lowest of latencies and the highest of throughputs.
The question here, I'm just conscious, the last question probably, which is around, do you consider Edge efficient only for live video or also for video on demand, which require huge storage capacity? And I guess there's a trade-off here. The cost of putting in the expenditure of the infrastructure at the edge, which is largely a capital investment, versus the operating cost of actually shipping large quantities of data, through the networks down from a more centralized cloud. Have you got any thoughts on that relationship? And do you see video on demand moving out to the edge as well? Or is it largely going to stay in the sort of aggregation point further back at the internet exchange?
Well, at least from what we've seen and the modeling that we've done, we think that video on demand live streaming has a stronger driver to move out to the edge because of the latency and the throughput requirements. So it's probably going to happen faster and more aggressively than something like video on demand, which is quite mature today, and there are distribution models that work reasonably well today. And I'd say the main thing around that economic business case is, just to refer back to what I said earlier about the idea that we expect that the deployment model and the commercial model at the edge won't just replicate what happens in these more core data centers. And if it does just try and replicate that, then it will be harder to make that business case for pushing deeper into the networks. I think we need to think a little bit more differently about whether, the way that we share compute and hardware resources between use cases, for instance, that level of visibility that Taze was talking about. Some of those elements need to be thought through in a different way when we're talking about edge locations in comparison to core. And I think that will help to increase the viability of the business case for even use cases like video on demand. Sorry, I hogged the final question.
No. While I fully agree with what Tilly says, it's not one or the other. We see sometimes that we have multiple tier caching setups where the base storage, of course, happens deeper in the network because that's where most of your hardware is, most of your storage is. And that's where we're trying to innovate as well to make that as affordable and as efficient as possible, but also maybe some other tasks such as authentication or other levels of personalization where overlays appear on your video player. That could happen closer. So it's not one or the other. It's a very hybrid thing. And I think it's all about the user experience, and the user experience is not limited to just storing those simple, plain OTT video files. So I think there's opportunities for VOD also closer, but not purely from a storage point of view, as you mentioned.
Thank you. I'm conscious we've gone a couple of minutes over. I'd just like to say thank you, Taze, Ulrika, Ella, Tilly, for your contributions. Really appreciated. We will get the presentations out to you. We've had a lot of questions. We haven't managed to get through them all. We will undertake to get a written answer back to you. Some of them are quite specific. They will be, and they will require Varnish to respond on specific things, but we will do that in the next few days. And just say thank you so much. And you've got a chance to meet Varnish either online or at one of those trade shows they mentioned. So thank you very much and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.